Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fallthrough. Today I have with me our regular panel. Matt, how are you today?
Hello, all good. Coming from hotel.
Yeah, new background, who dat? I have Kris as well. How are you on this snowy New York day right now?
Good. I'm not ready for the cold, the intense cold it's gonna be this week. It's gonna be rough. Yeah, it's also a little weird, swapping seats here. You hosting, me just being a co-host. It's a little different.
Yeah, I'm not sure I like it, but we'll power through. And then another familiar face you all might recognize, Angelica, one of our producers now. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. I'm very excited that you've let me come on today. And you chose a very, very good topic, so I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, leads right into it. Today we're talking about complexity. Kind of where did it all come from? I think there's kind of been a consensus in the community that complexity is on a up and to the right trajectory, right? Things are getting more complex and kind of, in my perspective, outpacing the world that we're modeling. Like the complexity isn't coming from what we're trying to do. It's coming from the technology itself. So I think to get started, do you all agree with that? Do you have any experience with that?
I agree with that at a high level. I mean, we'll have to define what we really mean by that, but I would say it's true that the field is the most complex it's ever been. And it's continuing to get more complex.
Kris, you agree?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous how complex things have gotten over time. Like it's so hard to build things now. And I think I said in the last episode about just how we've gotten our hardware has gotten so much more powerful, and yet software seems to have gotten worse and slower. So yeah, we definitely have some complexity problems.
Yeah, I think I agree at a high level. I think there is an inevitability to the complexity, and then there's the avoidable complexity in my mind. I'm sure we'll dig into that as we have our little chit chat today. But I think at a high level, definitely getting more complex as time goes on, and we are definitely struggling to keep up with that, and it is causing a lot of detrimental impact to the work that we do, and real progress, in my opinion, too.
Mm.
Yeah, so I have a hypothesis as to where some of this complexity comes from. So maybe I'll give that all to you and see what you think. I think a lot of it kind of comes from this, not idea, but there was such a demand for developers for so long, right? And so we did a lot to make kind of the job easier, right? We built all these kind of general purpose systems to make things smoother, right? So I'm talking everything from like Kubernetes to kind of general purpose databases to all of this. So we get this layer of abstraction that was meant to make things easier and faster. And all it has really done is added extra steps of learning, extra steps of things you need to know, things you need to do to be productive in the job. I think the cloud is probably the single biggest contributor to that, right? Like Lambda functions were not a thing, right? And they're supposed to be easy, but think of all the complexity you get with trying to run something on Lambda, like the cold starts, the weird optimizations you do. So that's my hypothesis. How does everyone else?
Is it unpopular opinion time? Because I have one. No. Well, we just get right into it. No, I agree with you. I think calling these things abstractions sometimes is part of the problem, because they're not actually abstracting much, because they're still forcing you to learn what it is they're meant to be abstracting. And I think that's part of the problem. It's like you promised me that if I used your tool, I no longer have to think about the things that you're abstracting. Then I still have to think about the things you're abstracting. So why do I use your tool? And then we do that again and again and again. And it's like, I might as well just learn to think myself. That's where I feel like a lot of it does come from too.
Yeah, I think that also comes from us trying to make things like a lot simpler so that we can get more people kind of into the industry. So we're like, oh, we need all of these abstractions to make it super easy to spin up whatever you want to spin up or to do whatever you want to do. Like we make it easy to do the first 10% of something. Like I feel like that feels like what all of the cloud providers give you. It's like the nice, oh, when you think about this for like 10 minutes, this all seems wonderful. But then when you actually have to go use it and deploy it, it just becomes like just bathed in complexity because you're trying to attach all these things together. And it's like, oh, we didn't think through this whole thing because we wanted to give you like a nice little easily marketable, like super like common sense, obvious thing to do. And it's just like, it's like, well, no, this thing doesn't actually work properly or doesn't work the way you want it to work. Like I think like especially things like Kubernetes, I think gives us a lot of that where it's like on the surface level, it seems like something that's pretty simple, but when you dig into it, it's actually pretty complex at the end of the day.
Yeah, we can go into a lot for Kubernetes. Oh man, there's so much there. Well, let's let it bake for a little bit. Let the listener bake.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that's also kind of this idea of role expansion, right? Like the cloud has given us the ability, so like as a single developer, I can design my infrastructure, deploy my infrastructure, run my software on it, right? And I think that's probably a net positive, but also like now I need to be an expert on everything. Now I need to, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that because it is really nice being able to do everything, but it's like, where am I failing, right? I don't even know enough to know where the shortcomings are. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Kris put it really well. Like these tools or abstractions are optimized for the first 10% of your journey, and they'll get you there very quickly and get you very productive very quickly. But then when you want to do that next thing and be more productive or go to the next step, it's like, oh, well, by the way, let me just learn all of this stuff, right? Take the bag out and just learn all these tools, by the way, before you can move forward. And that's overwhelming, right? Especially if you've never heard of the tools that you have to learn now or the concepts you have to learn. It's just overwhelming. And you're like, wait a minute, did I make a mistake doing this thing? Going with the cloud, going with Kubernetes, whatever the thing is?
Yeah, I think I have like a hot take hypothesis about why we have some of this complexity. And it starts with we have continually over time required people to not just have to do fewer things that are lower in the stack, but we've required them to not have to understand things that are lower in the stack. So I know on the episode about whether we think you should code, we talked about, or I talked about at length, networking and how so many of us don't understand how the networking stack works and how there's a lot of repercussions, that deal with complexity with that. But I think that goes almost all the way up the stack. Like even people that use virtual machines, like the JVM or like Python or JavaScript, don't usually know how the internals of those things work. But they're also building libraries that become load-bearing infrastructure for the rest of us. So if you don't have a good understanding of how something works, but you are trying to build on top of it, you're probably going to wind up building something that doesn't hit that simplicity that we all like, that doesn't feel like it seamlessly integrates with something. And I feel like we just keep doing that over and over and over again. And I think this is how you wind up with like the current state of the industry where you have, we talk about front end, and you have people that are not JavaScript developers, not front end developers, but React developers. They know React. React is all they know. And if you want them to build something in something else, they're not really going to understand how to do that, or they're going to struggle a lot to try and figure out how to do that. And I think that comes from this, like, oh, well, you don't need to know these lower level things. Don't bother with that. And the ethos in the industry of saying, oh, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't go look at that thing down there. You don't need to look at that thing. Don't bother with it. And when you're just building an application, that's fine. But when you're building something that becomes dependent on by other people, that's very much not fine. And I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. Because when I look at the things I like the least, what I usually find is some misunderstanding of how the things lower in the stack actually work. I think that definitely is true of like APIs, like REST APIs are a good example, where I think REST APIs are just a thing where people don't know what REST is because they never sat down and read the dissertation. And I know that most people don't want to read dissertations, but it's not that boring of a read. But because people haven't read it, they misunderstand what it is, and then they build these things that are like kind of unwieldy to use. And then you wind up with those unwieldy things to use. Oh, we need to do something better now. And then you wind up with like GraphQL, which is like a response to response of like a misunderstanding. And then you just have all this complexity because now you're like, oh, well, GraphQL should solve all of our problems. But it's like, now you've introduced all of these other problems because you were trying to solve this one problem. We didn't think through all of the other ramifications of it. Like, how do you do security properly with GraphQL? With REST, it was actually pretty simple overall, but with GraphQL, you have to do field level security now, and that's a completely different model. And did we think about that when we were going to, trash our REST API to put in GraphQL API? Probably not. Or, if we are using Kubernetes, another similar thing of gRPC, like, oh, we're going to use gRPC instead of REST. Well, did we think about the ramifications of how gRPC is designed compared to how REST is designed, compared to how we should maybe be doing networking when we're doing containers on shared machines instead of just dedicated machines talking to each other? But like we didn't think about a lot of these things. And I think that lands us where we are with this tremendous amount of complexity. So my hypothesis, to recap, is that people didn't learn deep enough into the stack. And because of that, they're making things that don't fit with things that are lower in the stack. And those not fitting pieces wind up creating the complexity that we all feel.
But do you think it's a lack of willingness to take the time to comprehend, or do you think there's the willingness but not the time and the ability to really dig? Because Kris, a lot of basically you kept on saying like they didn't think about this, they didn't think about this. Do you think it's that software engineers today are not expected to know as much, or is it that they're not given enough time? I.e., we're setting unrealistic expectations of how much one software engineer, one team can comprehend, especially in a world where everyone's supposed to be like a full stack engineer. But maybe this is an unpopular opinion. I don't think anyone actually can be. I feel like you're an engineer who specializes in a certain area and you're okay, can like get by with the other areas. But would be interested to hear, I guess, broadly.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a time issue or a lack of willingness from those who are entering into the industry now? Because I don't feel like they need to.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be a time issue. I think for the most part, though, like when I mentioned things like GraphQL or gRPC, like when I say they didn't, think about things, it's not that like for their problem they were solving, I'm sure they thought about it very deeply. But when that technology got pushed out to everybody else, that's a completely different context than what you were in. I'm sure GraphQL solved a real problem that Facebook was having. Same thing with React. It solved a real problem that they were having in their context for the path that they took to get to where they are. But that's not the path that most people wind up in. Same thing with gRPC, right? All of these technologies, when they were created, I do feel that the people that created them likely did think through the problem domain and likely did understand their problem domain very well. But that does not necessarily mean it's a good thing to translate to the rest of us, because we all have different problem domains. So when you generalize that thing, that's where you need to do the extra thinking to say, oh, does this still fit? And I think a lot of the time the answer is no. Like, should you be hyper optimizing your queries to avoid having to do extra API requests? Well, if you only have to do 4 or 5 REST API requests to get all the data you need, no. It's like if you have to do 200, yes, you probably want to turn that into a small number of GraphQL requests. But if you're not doing a large number of them, or if you don't need to have like a super low latency application, then that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's also I think it's both, right? Like it's time and willingness for sure, depending on who you're talking to and what's going on, right? Because the business is always going to say, business goals first, do the business thing, get the thing out the door, ship it. And that's always going to be like, in tension with simplicity and thinking through your designs and understanding the abstractions that you're settling for. It's always going to be a tension with that. But to Kris's point, like, I'm sure that all these technologies that you've mentioned did solve problems for the companies that created it, but they also had different constraints, like you say. So if we apply those same tools to solve the problems that we have, the problem might look similar, but our constraints are much different, or our circumstances are much different, right? Taking 4 API requests down to 3 might actually be significant in something like Meta when you're handling millions of requests or whatever, but your company that makes no money and has no users, doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, right? Because it's not the source of your problem. And I think a lot of us look at that and they say, oh, well, Facebook's using it, or Meta, or whatever the name is now, or Google's using it, or whoever's using it. It must work for everybody. We have to do it too. It's like, no, you're not them. It's okay to not be them and not take down that complexity just because they happen to do it.
Yeah, I do think there's almost I don't know. It's trendy to build things like your FAANG, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think this is kind of a hot take, but I don't no knocking. I don't mean to insult FAANG companies. They have a lot of path dependency that they're dealing with. A lot of these companies are old. Even Facebook now is 20 years old, right? These are some old companies. But I don't think that they do, I don't think you could objectively say they do the best engineering. I think they do good engineering. I think they do a lot of good software development. But because of the path dependency they have to do things in particular ways to deal with all of the stuff they've already built, which means that they can do the best for themselves, but not best generally. I think the people that build the best things generally are people that are building new things now. That's a continuously rolling thing. And I think a lot of us, or a lot of the industry, has gotten it in its head that, oh, these companies are big and successful, so what they did must be great. But it's you don't know why they're successful. You don't know if what they have decided to do is benefiting them or detrimenting them, because they are behemoth organizations that are very old. If they do something that's a blunder, it could take years or decades for it to actually collapse. Whereas if you adopt that thing, it could collapse for you instantly, right? Or it can collapse for you very quickly. So I think we as an industry, I guess I want to provide some pushback and say we should stop thinking of FAANG as the best engineering in the world and start actually giving context to what they are and what they're doing. So I think that's important as well, because when we don't do that, we wind up with a lot of just too much complexity.
Yeah, Kris, levels.fyi says I should work at FAANG if I want the highest CC. What are you talking about? Money talks, right? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Ian.
I think people also forget that Facebook didn't start with GraphQL and React, right? And you're building for, I think a lot of people are building for longevity that maybe is not needed, and it's probably a detriment, right? But there is, I work at a small company, and the idea of building something less good than I possibly could and then having to go back and change it later isn't appealing, because getting someone to say oh, this needs optimized in a way to handle our new scale, getting that kind of project through is very difficult, right? Nothing will change to the users, but I need 6 months to make sure this doesn't fall over. That looks bad on me. It's the thing you built previously is broken. You mean you need 6 more months to make it scale to our current users? So there's also a systemic problem there, right? Where it's, you can't build for your current scale, because if you do scale, you're not gonna get the opportunity to fix it. Does that track what I'm trying to say there?
That makes sense, honestly, and I get that argument, and honestly, I've been bitten by it as well. My pushback to that argument is, sure, you should be building whatever you're building. You should be thinking about how it's going to be used and kind of account for that future. Not so much so that you're over optimizing early, but enough where you're okay, I can see on the horizon, if we meet our goals, if our company does well, here's where we'll be. I can project to that. But also, tech is not the only thing that should be built for the future, or that will fail as you scale. There's so many businesses that over-index on, my tech has to be ready for 1 million users. It's but your sales team isn't ready for 1 million users. Your support team isn't ready for 1 million users. None of your company is ready for 1 million users outside of the tech. Forget about the tech. You want 1 million users? What good is having 1 million users and the site's up, but they're all pissed off because they can't interact with support or something? Think about it that way too, And I don't know, I think a lot of companies way over index on the tech when it's just a part of the business.
But I think they over-index on the wrong metrics on tech as well. So I think it's like, oh, we need to scale to 1 million users, and I'm like, what does that mean, right? Like, you need to say more than just like, oh, 1 million users can use the site. I'm like, well, if 1 million users are on the site and you have like 1 second latency to load your web page, well, that's not great. So is it like, oh, like you have to actually add more context and parameters to things, and then everything starts getting complicated, right? Because you're like, okay, well, what does it mean, like, you know, to be able to scale? Like, are we saying one server should be able to handle 1 million users? Are we saying we have this distributed system? Okay, under like what constraints does that distributed system work for, you know, 1 million users? Like, how much network failures can we have? Like, how much, you know, how many drives can be failing in our database, right? Like, there's like all of these other questions we have to ask about, like, you know, what does it mean to scale to this large number? And I think people over-index on like one metric. They're like, well, here's the one thing that we're gonna say. If we're doing this, then we are successful in our like scaling of this technology. But the nuance is just like humongous when you want to get to any reasonable sense of scale.
So I also kind of want to look at the other side of this, right? I mean, so complexity is going up, right? I do get the sense that like in some regards it's good because the complexity comes from like being concerned with correctness, right? Like having fault tolerant databases and like event systems that don't lose data. I feel like we have made progress there, right? So do you think some of this complexity is coming from just better practice, like more robust systems?
I really want that to be true, but I don't think it is. Like, I really want it to be that, like, oh, we're building these more robust things, and that's where this complexity comes from. Like, yeah.
I don't know. You can get really far and reliable with simple systems. You really can. Like, I understand everyone wants 5 nines plus of availability and whatnot, and they can't take downtime ever. It's unacceptable. It's like, well, I think you're lying to yourself that it's unacceptable, because what it takes to get there is very complex. You know, like the systems that the hyperscalers run that chase 5 nines, they're very complex systems, and they have very complex teams behind it to manage them. So is that what you want? Or are you okay taking like the 4 nines availability with a much simpler system that you can actually manage, but the trade-off is that there could be downtime? And I think a lot of companies, they just miss that. And they say it's for reliability and they say it's for, you know, durability of data or whatever, but they're just kind of like putting that facade on to try to convince themselves that they're more important, that their business is more important than what it actually really is under the hood. You know, and it sucks to say that, right? It sucks to say, like, I have a business. It's okay if it's not up. Like, no business person wants to hear that, but sometimes it's okay.
I feel like if you want, like, I mean, if like high availability, like, you know, you want 5 nines, like I think the thing that gets missed out of that, like the underlying current, which I kind of just popped into my head, I think it's hilarious, is that the common denominator between all those FAANG companies is the systems that they use to get that 5 nines are all systems they built themselves. And whenever anybody else is like, oh, we want 5 nines, let's go use somebody else's system. Like, you're not using the same logic that they used to get the systems that use 5 nines. You're just trying to take their 5 9 systems and use them yourself.
But worked. So I get to use Kubernetes. What do you mean? That's what they promised me.
They're like, Kubernetes
will stay running.
We'll solve our problems. And I also think there's this thing that's happened where the base has shifted, of like subtle things underneath us have moved, and we haven't recognized that. And I think that spawns complexity in a lot of ways. Like, I think a good example of this is containers, right? I mean, I talk about networking too much. I'm sorry, listener. I like talking about networking, okay? So like with containers and networking, when you think about it, I think most people, because the argument, the marketing was all, oh, containers are just like smaller VMs. You should just treat them like smaller VMs. But containers are not smaller VMs when it comes to networking, because the containers are running on a VM, which means that the containers are all sharing a single NIC, which means that the way you do networking should be completely different than how you would do it for things that aren't sharing the same NIC. But how many of us have designed systems that actually take that into account, take both the advantages and the disadvantages of that into account. Probably not most of us. We just kind of were like, oh, let's just keep using TCP. And it's like, okay, well, now your one box that's talking to this one other box has like 3,000 TCP connections between it. Why? Why do you have that? Like, can you do that with 4? Can you change how you do networking so you don't need to make all these extra TCP connections and have all the extra TCP overhead? Like, but you know, if you go into a company, like I've done this before, you go into a company and you suggest maybe we shouldn't use Kubernetes, or maybe we shouldn't use gRPC, or maybe we should try doing this in a different way. People are usually like, well, we can't do that. Like that's not the you should go use the thing that everybody else is using. Don't do this other thing. So I think that's also where a lot of this complexity comes from. Like we keep looking at these big companies and saying, well, look at the cool things they're doing. We take their tech. We don't think about what changes that tech entails for us. And then we are kind of surprised when, it didn't work the way we wanted it to work, or it didn't give us those 5 nines, or it didn't give us the availability or the reliability, the redundancy that we wanted.
Like it's interesting you say that. I do think like the cloud has given us like the opportunity to chase these things too, right? Like I can spin up my application in one region, one availability zone, but just with a little bit of extra complexity, you know, I can spin it up in 2 regions and 8 availability zones, right? And, you know, it just looks like this little bit of complexity, but then you do that 70 different places and all of a sudden you have a lot of complexity, right? So there's these like little promises that I think pop up that just like compound and compound.
Or you
But
realize
it's
that
not worth it, though.
Okay.
I don't know if it's worth it.
Like, I think that there's an argument for where some of the complexity is very much worth it. Like, I'm sure there are situations I've certainly been in where there's like, we could do it this way, very simple, this is what it will give us. But if we just add this additional little thing, whether it's like, as you said, Ian, like adding that additional region, I feel like there are instances in which that complexity is the good kind, in my mind, of complexity, where it's valid, it gives you enough pro to that decision. And yes, fair, if you continue to do that and continue to do that and continue to do that, it's going to be much more complexity than maybe you were prepared to handle. But I do think there is an argument and there is a categorization of complexity in this conversation that's like positive in a lot of ways. I think it's more, and maybe back to your point, Kris, around like thinking it through and really making sure that complexity is correct and right for your use case, for your problem you're solving, and you're not trying to smudge like a square peg into a round hole and just saying it fits, because it's not going to cover most of it, even if there are these cracks. So I don't know, I'd be interested to hear from you all on your views there. Like, I think there is a distinction between the positive complexity and the negative. I just don't think we've got very good at distinguishing the two.
No, I would 100% agree with distinguishing between the two is the hard part.
Yeah.
I think that any system that grows over time is inherently going to become more complex, like by definition, right? It has to, right? You can't grow and keep it the same simplicity. It just doesn't exist. But over time, like as you choose to like increase complexity in your system for growth, you should be thinking about that like refactoring or that maintenance work to kind of get back some simplicity, right? Can I re-architect this? Can I do this differently? You should be thinking about that as you work on your system. And like with the region example, yeah, sometimes you do need multi-region redundancy and whatnot, but you should be thinking it through, but not a lot of people do. And they end up doing simple mistakes like putting their S3 bucket in a global like region that's really in a US East 1, and they think they have multi-region, but they don't. Or the DNS is in one region and that goes down, or things of that nature. It's like if you're going to accept the complexity in the name of like reliability or availability or whatever it's going to be, you need to make sure like it cuts through all the layers, or at least enough layers to where you're comfortable of taking that risk. Because so many people don't. They're just like, click EC2, multiple regions, we're done. It's like, no, there's more to do, I swear.
We made a mistake similar to that. We run in a couple of different regions, and we had like a cache that, all the regions talked to. It lived in multiple regions. And eventually we realized, hey, wait a second. What if we just have a separate cache in each region and they don't know about each other? And that's fine, right? So, yeah, I don't.
I think a lot of the complexity that we face, I think in software specifically, comes from wanting to move faster, or really not even wanting to move faster, but wanting to think less, right? Like I think databases are a good example of this. Most of the time people will say, just use Postgres. Like just go use Postgres. But I think people don't understand that if you just say, just use Postgres, you're tying yourself to like a single region sort of thing. Like as soon as you want to do a kind of more distributed type of thing, you're going to run into giant amounts of pain because Postgres was never designed to be a distributed sort of thing, right? It's like, no, you run this on a server and it just kind of doesn't, you can like replicate it so you can have some sort of failover, but you know, failover is like a small corner of what it means for an application to be distributed. And it doesn't really wind up being resilient at the end of the day. It just means that instead of having an operator come in and flip a switch, it flips the switch itself. And I think that a lot of the time, even though we say that people should just use Postgres, you could probably get away with writing your own thing on top of maybe SQLite or BoltDB or something like that. Like, how much of SQL do you need? And how much is SQL like helping you? Because I think we as an industry sit here and we're like, oh yes, of course you're going to use SQL. That's the thing that makes sense. But if you look at the distributed systems research and kind of like the database research, that's not the style of database that I think a lot of us are going with, or makes a lot of sense. Like I think Datomic is a good example of a database. It's like, yeah, no, we don't use this SQL thing. We're talking about facts that are asserted and retracted, and then you compile those facts together to build up your data model of what you want to have at the end of the day. And when you just have facts you're moving around, those are a lot easier to move around than like the concepts of SQL queries and the way that we tend to optimize them. So I think like even that first decision of saying, oh yes, we're just going to not only just use a database by default, but by use a SQL database by default and use Postgres by default, I think you wind up pulling in a whole bunch of complexity that you might not realize you're pulling in, and you might not reap the benefits that you think you're going to get out of it. Like if you don't have query patterns that are heavier, you're not really utilizing all of the things that Postgres can do, and you're just like, I'm just storing simple data, then you've brought in a whole bunch of complexity. You've restricted what you can do in the future, at least in a cost-effective manner. Like you can go use one of Amazon or some cloud providers, redundant and resilient version of Postgres they have and pay an arm and a leg for it. But you kind of made these decisions up front. I don't think people have actually thought through that whole set of circumstances and that complexity, because I think they're just told like, no, this is. I think that in this case, that gets guised as simplicity. It's like, this is the simple choice. Just pick Postgres. It's easy. It's simple. You have a database now. You can move on to other things. And it's like, actually, you've just let the complexity monster into your house. Like, have fun. And God forbid you wind up scaling. Like, I remember listening to the Oxide and Friends episode where they talked about like why they went with Cockroach and didn't go with Postgres, because they're like, yeah, we started scaling, and then all of a sudden all of these daemons popped out, and like it was just a monster, and it was just a mess. So it's like, yeah, it's probably not giving you what you want at the end of the day. And a lot of that, I think, comes from people not thinking or not wanting to think as much, or like not wanting to push back on the general ethos of the industry that, just says, go use this thing.
I think you kind of hit on an interesting point there. Like even pulling in relational data into like your models adds a complexity that like we don't really think about, right? Like a key value store is very simple. When I start adding this relational data in, I can do things that I couldn't with a key value. And I guess what I'm getting at here is it might not even be like we don't want to think about it. It's like we don't know the complexity. Like it's not a muscle we flex, like knowing what complexity we're bringing in accidentally.
We've mentioned a few places where complexity kind of hides or shows itself. Kubernetes, the cloud, networking, databases. Where else have you all seen complexity creep in? Like through your work with others or whatever. Where else have you seen this?
So I actually think there's a lot of complexity that creeps in just because of our like human organizational structures, right? You've all heard people talk about microservices as not a tech solution, they're like a human communications solution, right? And like that's just one example. I think there's quite a bit where it's like this team handles that. So I do this workaround so that I don't have to talk to this team to do a thing, right? I think a lot seeps in there.
How about you, Angelica? Any
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think two places. One is what Ian, you mentioned. I think often we organise, and we've actually, my team specifically, have just gone through a reorg because of this, is we went through a number of years where we were organising our teams based on our architecture, or the other way around, where we went, okay, we have, so for example, my teams, there's 4 teams, and they all have their own domains, and so they build with those domains in mind. So I'll have conversations where my engineering team will come to me and say, hey, we've decided to build it in this way. And one of the reasons of the list, there are technical reasons too, they're very smart engineers, but one of the reasons that makes it on the official tech brief is so that we don't have to talk to this other team, or we don't have to have a dependency on this other team, or hey, Angelica, we could do it this way. This is probably the right way to do it, but like we don't want to do it that way because we don't want to have a dependency. We don't want to be deeply coupled with this other system, this other service. Even within our own architecture, there are conversations where like, okay, well, we have these 2 services. If we can avoid coupling them, we don't really want to. Why? We don't have to like mess with the dependencies that, if we have to make a change in this API later, we don't have to worry about it. Not even if that's the correct technical path. I think there's a lot of that. So Ian, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I also think there's a lot of like feature creep that happens, and I smile as I say this because I am accountable definitely for causing some of this, where a product manager like me will come to my team and say the board has decided they're really excited about this new AI ML feature. It's usually some new technology that someone high up has heard about and got very excited about, with no understanding of the complexity or whether in fact we are the right team to be building it or doing anything about it. They're like, hey, Angelica, you need to make this happen. You have a month. Do it. We have a conversation, and because the framing of the conversation is, hey, we've got a month to do this, we have to get something done, instead of thinking as in an engineering team, what is the best solution? Okay, should we even be doing this work? It's like, okay, well, how can we like tag this on to what we already have? How can we use something that was never supposed to be for this reason to somehow make it work? And then, of course, you do that, you add that tech debt. The feature is, wonderful because you've done it the best way you can, you've made it work. So externally, everyone's like, great, it's working. And then they go, okay, great. So we're now going to use this for the next 3 years and we're going to get all the other teams using it too. And then you have somewhat what Kris, you mentioned is they then go, oh, great. So Angelica's team has done it this way. We're just going to go into their code, copy paste. We'll just make it work. They did it this way, so it must be working for them. And then you just have everyone implementing code that no one has really had the time, bluntly, to think through in the right way. And you have these patterns. And often it does come from, I've seen this happen on my team. We're like, oh, this other team did this. We should just do it their way. Like, we don't even need to write a tech brief. This is a problem that's already been solved. Why are we reinventing the wheel? Let's just go in, see how they did it, and literally copy paste this code, make a few changes, and see if it works. Without thinking about that long term.
We need like an ad segment here, like a lawyer segment. If you or someone you know is hurt by a product manager somewhere, please let us know. Reach out.
I say this in 2 minds because in product manager's defense, there is lack of empathy on the highest levels because a lot of the time
100%.
People don't care about how it's done, bluntly. They don't care about the details. They just care that it's done and that it hits the metrics that they're looking for.
Yep. This is where I think Kris was
regrettably
getting at.
Yeah,
I think that's where I think Kris was getting at earlier about like we're measuring the wrong metrics. It's a willingness probably or time problem. All of that comes into play. And your first example sounded more like trading complexities, right? I don't want to interact with this team, so I will take on the burden of complexity, or I'll trade one complexity for another. And that's actually a pretty interesting point to go by, because I haven't really thought about it that way, of like trading complexities, until you brought up that point. I have nothing to say there. I just wanted to say it was a good point.
No, it's a really good point.
No, that idea of trading complexity is really interesting. Like having one database per microservice, per service, right? That's a place where you trade a lot of complexity, right? Like, I have to replicate this now, but it's easier to reason about. And this, just going back, like, I just don't think we know the repercussions, and haven't like flexed that muscle to know, like, am I making the right trade? Which one is more complex? Which one's not, right? And I think the only way you learn that is by making mistakes. And so we do the safe thing because, you know, it's known, like pulling in Postgres.
I think you also just document why you made the decision to move forward, so that when you do reach the point where you're like, hey, this no longer works for me, you could at least refer to that and say, here's why I did it, and I can like go the other way now. So if you document that, or write your RFDs or whatever, I think that helps mitigate that a little bit. Maybe not mitigate it, but help you pivot when you need to pivot later on.
And you learn more that way, I would say. Like,
yeah.
You'd be like, because I don't remember why I made this decision 3 years ago, when I can go back and look at it and say, like, this was a wrong decision. Why did I make it? Like, exactly.
I think there's a root here. There's like a root of the complexity. Didn't really think about it until you, Matt, were kind of like, oh, where else have you seen complexity outside of just the tech? And I think that root complexity is that we as an industry are abysmal to like a kind of ridiculous degree at organizing information. Like, we are very, 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 very bad at actually not just we're really good generating information. We're bad at knowing where the information is at any point in time, right? Because I think all of the problems we have talked about have to deal with, there is probably some information somewhere that we could be consuming to make the systems we build less complex, but we just don't know where it is, right? That's the whole, like, you know, if you look at the systems that FAANG builds, they're giving you the code. They're not giving you any of the history of how they wound up with that code. When you're talking about things like what you were talking about, Angelica, where it's like, oh, the higher ups want to do things this way. Well, the higher ups have no context. Like, every company I have worked at, the higher up people have very little understanding of what it is that the actual engineering teams are doing, and the engineering teams are very bad at providing information to those execs about what they're doing. And every time that I've sat down with an exec or someone that's high up, and I've brought the information to them and said, this is why we shouldn't do it this way. This is how much time we need to do it the right way. And just laid out all the information. They're like, oh yeah, no, just that makes me do it that way. Just do that thing. It's so much of the time they're not being malicious. They're just like, well, you've provided me no understanding of why we can't just do it this way, or you've provided me very weak understanding of why we can't just do it this way. And I think too, that whole, we're going to trade off this complexity of not wanting to talk to this other team. That's also an information organization problem. Like, it's too hard to communicate with these people, so I don't want to have to. So we have to make it easier to communicate with them. But the way you get to that is by having better organized information, because if the way I'm communicating with people is by talking to them, then that wastes my time and their time, and now I have to actually synchronize with that. But if the way I communicate with another team is by reading some information they've created, or watching a video, or whatever medium that they have provided the information to me in, well, then it's a lot easier to communicate with them and to actually collaborate with them. So, like, I think all of these problems stem from our really strong desire to just not organize information. Like, we love generating it. We love having the meetings, doing the whiteboarding. We love writing up docs, all of that. But we just don't actually turn around and put it in a place where we can find it. Or like, oh, like Google search, or we'll do some web search, or we'll put it in the wiki, and the wiki will have a search, and then we'll find it that way. It's like, no, like, actually come up with information organization systems and deploy them, and we would solve a lot of our inherent complexity. And I think the funny thing about it too is it's not like it's an expensive endeavor to do this. I think it's like a willingness of us as an industry to admit that, you know, we can't solve everything with algorithms, and some of it is we just need to hire some humans that are trained in this to actually go around, collect the information, then organize it. Like, this is not like there's not a piece of software you can install. There's not an AI that you can get that can do this. This is hiring information science professionals to help you build and design information organization systems and then deploying them. And we just need to do that as an industry. And for some reason, I still don't understand why, we just don't want to do it. And instead we wind up spending absurd amounts of money getting ourselves in these holes. And like, I'm sure many a company have gone bankrupt because of this. Like, many good ideas have floundered because of this, or at least have been prohibitively more expensive than they should be, because we just don't want to organize our information. We don't want to put it in a spot where you can find it.
I
I
feel
just
like
want to spam the emoji of clapping. This is
I
an
feel
emoji,
like
but I'll spam it. Sorry,
I feel like
Angelica.
that it's all right. I need to get better at butting in with authority so that no one speaks over
I'm
me.
also like on the
I'm
other side
working
of
on
the.
it.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm like
working on it.
latency right now, all the way to the other side.
No, you're good. So, Kris, I think what you've made me think about is I think there are two types of complexity we're talking about here. I think there's the kind of innate link between cognitive understanding and complexity, i.e. if we make things more easy to understand, we won't feel like things are so complex, kind of like what you're speaking to, Kris. If we make that information easy to access, easy to understand, and we have processes in place to make sure it continues to be, because as someone who's done documentation sprints and then 5 months later we haven't done any documentation since, you have to continue to do it as a practice otherwise. So I think what you're speaking to really resonated in terms of trying to make that kind of cognitive complexity, that feeling that things are complex, go away. But I wonder if, and I'm trying to think out loud here, if we provided all that, whether that would be enough to eliminate that negative technical complexity that we've been touching on.
I don't think it would be.
I think it would
yeah.
be a step in the direction of solving it, right? It's not, it's going to take a long time because
Yeah.
we've accrued a lot of debt around this, right? Like, we've accrued like a tremendous amount. Like, basically, we spent the past 20 or 30 years just lighting all of our information on fire and using that to propel us forward. And I mean, that's how you wind up with all of this tech that we have that is just like absurdly complex. Like trying to operate Kubernetes is like a monstrous behemoth, and you have startups of 10 people being like, we're gonna embark on this. And it's like unwinding that from the industry, unwinding that ethos is going to be a very challenging thing, because it also means that we're going to have to sit down and actually train people on all of the lower level stuff you need to know to actually be able to build the things that you really should be able to build. Like, I think a lot of it is like how, if you do want to learn how to design a REST system that actually aligns with what Roy Fielding wrote about and with how the web actually works, there's like no books you can go read that will give you this information, right? You've got to go scour the web for as much as you can like take up and then read not just Roy Fielding's dissertation, but the follow-on work about REST. There's a whole bunch of stuff you got to go pick up. There's no easy way to just learn this. And then even once you do learn it, actually figuring out how to deploy it, how to realize it is also just a huge challenge. And there's not a lot of writing about how to actually take theoretical things and turn them into like actual real deployed things. So there's like all of this missing information that leads to us having missing skills. So when you sit down, like, I mean, I can say it kind of flippantly if I wanted to. I don't want to say it flippantly, but I could say it's just like, yeah, don't use Postgres. Go build your own thing. And that's easy for me to say, but that's not easy to actually do, because as soon as you remove Postgres, now you have to actually think about your data, and you have to think about, how do you store it? How do you move it around? Like, now you have to actually be like, oh, I don't have linearizability anymore. I don't have these constraints that I had before. How does that affect the rest of my system? And for a long time, we've been able to just defer those until like something falls over. And then we run around and we find some other vendor that produces something that they claim will solve all of our problems, and then we use that thing for a while, and then it doesn't, and we just kind of keep doing that thing. But if you say from the beginning, oh, we're not going to use Postgres, or we're not going to use Kubernetes, then you actually have to go build something, and you have to be the one that owns that thing, and you have to go find out the knowledge and understand the thing. Like, I think a lot of the technologies that give us complexity are the IBMs of the modern day, right? No one ever got fired for buying an IBM. Like, no one gets fired for suggesting Kubernetes or for saying let's use Postgres or for any of this stuff. But if you say, let's go build my own thing and it doesn't work, even if it's not your fault that it didn't work, even if it wasn't going to work if you use Postgres or Kubernetes, people are going to point the finger at you and be like, oh, well, it's your thing that broke, because that's the easiest thing to point the finger to, because, oh, you did the thing differently. So obviously the thing we did differently is the reason it didn't work. Everybody else is using this thing and they're not having problems. They're having lots of problems. You just don't see the problems because you're not there. But you're like, oh, this is the thing that's the problem, right? So I think there's that ethos that has to get unwound that will take a long time, even if we could snap our fingers tomorrow and have brilliant information organization systems, we would still have that complexity because that ethos is still there.
So that problem kind of exists on all the different levels too. Like, you were talking about like big pieces, databases, right? But imagine I have a string and I just want to replace all the zeros with O's. Right, I might grab a regular expression, right? Mm-hmm. And imagine all that complexity behind compiling and running that regular expression versus a for loop that goes through and just replaces the zeros, right? And I think that pattern is something we repeat over and over everywhere, right? From the database down to string manipulation, right?
Yeah. I
think. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, when we switched to the era of open source, we got all this open source, but we also got there's just a library I can just go use to do this thing. I don't have to go do it myself. I don't have to understand how this thing works myself. I don't have to deal with that. I'm just going to go grab this thing. And I think that brings in a lot of complexity as well from there.
It seems so simple at the start, though.
It does. I think you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you choose a technology off the shelf that's safe, then you're not, you can fall into the traps of, this technology doesn't fully work with me and I need to be more custom, blah, blah, blah. But if you build your own custom thing, then like you said, when things go wrong, you're going to be blamed. And even if you did choose the technology off the shelf, then people are going to be like, oh, wow, you can't build your own custom thing? That's why developers nowadays are getting dumber. They can't build anything. They just use glue code. And it's like, well, what do you want me to do, man? Like, honestly, what do you want me to do? I can only do so many things here. But speaking of the information organization stuff and like information organizing sort of role, people don't even organize their own information, right? Most people nowadays, they just dump flat files in Google Drive somewhere and they just rely on the search feature, or same thing with their phones. They don't even organize the apps on their phone. They just install them all, let them just be installed, and then just search for the app they need at the given time. And it's like, I think that's part of the problem. We're not even organizing our own information for our simple cases. How can we expect to organize our own information for the more complex cases? And this brings me to the question: do we believe that something like AI can be the information organizer? Can it be the librarian that we all need? Do we believe that to be true?
No.
No. I fully believe that at some point it will get there. Like it.
Not now, not ever. Because the problem with AI, right? We all like to think about AI as this thing that might be able to think on its own, but so much of like what makes, especially when we talk about information organization, what makes a good information organization system depends almost entirely on the humans that will be both generating and consuming the information that is organized. And you have to understand all of that context, and what is best for a situation will change depending on the humans involved. So it's like AI, I mean, unbundling that term, right? There are likely some machine learning algorithms and things like that will be helpful in figuring out how to organize this information. But there are things that computers are just like inherently bad at, and that even when they try to do pattern recognition, it's not going to fit well. Like, for instance, one of the things that happened when we went from having card catalog systems in libraries to having web catalog systems is they had to basically dumb down the algorithms that are used for cataloging. Because in card catalogs, you have humans that can make decisions about, oh, do these things fit together based on another human's reasonable understanding, right? Like, if you talk about something like, oh, we have a bunch of books on Henry VIII, but some of them are Henry and then THEEIGTH, and some of them are Henry 8TH, and some of them are Henry VIII. And in a card catalog, you'd want to have all of those things next to each other because they're all Henry VIII. But in a web search, there's no easily designed computer algorithm that will put all of those things next to each other. You have to custom code that. And you have to custom code that for every single context where that sort of thing might happen. So it's like, yes, we might associate these two things together, but it might not necessarily be like a logical thing, or it may take a lot of extra context. And the only way an AI is going to figure that out is if you can feed the AI enough examples, enough information that it can learn of those things, or if you can somehow connect the AI into the way that people think and the way that people communicate, and have it be able to be like, oh, okay, given the current context of this local group of people, they're organizing things in this way, so I should go organize things in that way. Like, we conceivably, like, maybe it could be possible to build something that could do this. Maybe. I'm not going to say never, but whether it'd be worth it or cost effective is just an absolute no. And whether, like, if we don't have any AI technology that would even be able to approach doing this at the moment. So it's like AI is not the solution here. But also, like, just economically, AI is a silly solution to this problem, right? Like, the solution to this problem is get people some, in schooling, start teaching people about information organization. Like, we used to, before we had computers ubiquitous, you had to learn it, right? If you had to go write a research paper, what did you have to do? You had to go to the library, you had to talk to the reference librarian, and they would help you find the information that you needed by searching the card catalog, learning the call system, learning where the subjects you might need to look for are in the library. You go in the stack, start picking up books, looking through things, right? You learned, okay, if I'm looking for this subject, I can go to this part of the stacks and pull books. And if there's a book on this subject, it'll be in this part of the stack, right? And so, like, that information, like, that's not a thing that gets taught to people a lot anymore. Like, I barely learned that in college, but the more that we get digitized, the more that people don't interact with, like, reference librarians as much. And since we don't have them in our companies, because every tech company refuses to hire librarians for some reason, you don't get exposed to them in tech companies either. So I think if we just exposed people to the information science folks, they would learn how to not just find organized information, but you kind of get through osmosis how to organize your own information as well. I do think it's a problem of people are not exposed to any of this, like, throughout most of their lives, because we just have stripped it away, right? And a lot of people spend time in libraries actually doing research anymore.
Well, it's worse. It's not even that stripped away from us. It's that the example you mentioned about going to the library and looking up, it's intentional, right? You're intentionally seeking out information that's relevant to what you're looking for. Whereas, and you can argue and say, hey, Matt, no, I could just Google search something, right? Or I could search something and it would work. But you're not intentionally searching anything, really. You're just letting Google tell you what to click on. Yeah, sure, you have the option of clicking on the link or not, but odds are you're not going to look through the links or look through the results and find ones that are relevant and, like, kind of cherry pick them a little bit. You're going to choose the top 3 links if they're not sponsored ads or whatever, and you're going to go from there. And you're basically letting Google or whatever search engine tell you what to click on. And it's like the act of being intentional is kind of lost there, Whereas before it was like you had a couple books in your hand. You're like, okay, which one am I going to dive into about this? Nowadays, we don't even ask ourselves that question. We just read the title of a headline somewhere, and we know everything we need to know.
I think the concept of search being not something you have to type into a bar, like a text box, is foreign to most people, right? If you talk about, like, even simple things like wikis, right? A good wiki, if it's well designed and well laid out, you don't need that search bar, right? Because, it's like you have a good call system. So you're like, if this team has written documentation about this system, I know that it will be in this place. I don't need to go type what I think they might have titled it. I don't need to type, this team or something in search bar. I just click a few links and then boom, I'm in the spot where that information will be. If that information is not there, then they haven't written it, and I can go talk to them, and maybe we can generate it, and we can go from there. It's not me being like, I didn't craft the right magical incantation into this box to spit back out at me the things. Because, if search is you writing incantations into a box, you have to get really good at guessing what other people have conceptualized as the words to use to convey this information. Whereas if you pre-designed a system that says, if this information is available, it will be here, there's a lot less ambiguity. You just go and you look at the spot, and if it's there, good. If it's not, you can go talk to somebody.
Do you not think, though, that ML could really help with the initial generation, though? I know that's slightly different than what we're talking about, but for example, I have done this, my team has done this, where they put a load of code into, yes, a text box, or they provide the code file, but then it says, write a summary of what this does, and more often than not, it's pretty close to accurate, / over time, I'm sure it will get better. Because I think the real excitement in my mind when it comes to information organization, and I actively use this in my job, is you have a load of information or a load of historical documentation, code, whatever it may be. I've done it with Excel sheets where I will say, summarize this, or tell me what the pattern is in this, or tell me how many times X kind of pattern is used. And it's been, for my use cases, of course, depending on the complexity, it might be better or worse, also depending on which LLM you're using. But I found that hugely useful and really, really helpful for summarizing and providing information that is more comprehensible and means that I don't have to go and read 50 documents. Obviously, you have to build confidence in the fact that it's going to give you an accurate answer. But that's what gives me hope that there is, and I agree, not now, I still need to go through and spot check. I don't have absolute confidence in these toolings yet, but I do hope to get to a place where I would be able to do that with 100% confidence that it will be accurate enough for my purposes. I don't know, I'm interested to hear what the groups think. I also know, Ian, when Kris originally talked about this, I saw you go, ooh, I think that's actually could be really helpful. I'd be interested to hear.
Matt talked about how everyone is just storing everything as flat files in a Google Drive, right? Which I do think is a problem. It's discoverability is a problem, but I do think maybe not yet, but at some point AI will be able to go and make a clean wiki that you can navigate, like Kris mentioned, by just looking at those flat files, right? As a presentation layer on top of our data, right? And maybe not just a search bar chat like that, but actually building out and keeping documents up to date. I really believe that's something that large language models will be able to do, assuming they don't plateau.
I mean, I think maybe part of the reason why I don't believe that as much is likely rooted in the reason why a bunch of flat files isn't that helpful is because they haven't been put under, what is called bibliographic control. And what bibliographic control means is that you've taken metadata and then you've specifically designed that metadata so it can be cataloged, which allows you to search it. And while AI is great at things that are well understood and well known at the moment, it's not as good at necessarily understanding context for things that are new or for newly generated information or ways that language changes, right? So it has to keep up with what current language is. But I also think that metadata generation is not actually that difficult of a thing to do. It's just something that you have to be trained on how to do it, right? You're okay, well, this is and once again, I think if we boil it down, if we reduce from AI to just regular algorithms and maybe some ML stuff, I think absolutely, right? I think that if you have a bunch of flat files, but they're all in a structured format where here's the metadata, right? I've gone in and I've written out here's the title, here's some keywords, here's blah, blah, blah. You've structured it. I think that the system can go through and just organize it for you, right? I think that that's the part it can do well. But that initial step of generating that metadata and actually designing the bibliographic control system, I think that needs to be something that a human does because it's a human that's going to be using and consuming it at the end of the day. The way a machine might organize something is not necessarily the most intuitive way that an individual would. This is especially true of local, for you or for a small group of people systems. So I think that there is this place for technology, especially computing, to help us here. I just don't think it's AI. I think AI is just I think it's a lower level thing mixed with understanding of information organization, theory, and science.
I have a follow-up question. If we get really good at explaining what we want to do you think that we could solve the writing of code? Because I think if you can really, really accurately articulate, not now, but in the future, in some future state, exactly what you need, could we take away a lot of the complexity that feels, through our conversation, somewhat rooted in human decision-making? Am I going to do it this way? Am I not? Am I going to make this trade-off, this other trade-off?
If we actually focus...
Huh?
Is that not what code is? Is code not just very precisely explaining what you want something to do?
In a different language, yes. But I think a lot of what I'm hearing is a lot of the complexity that is introduced is by people who perhaps don't understand fully what is happening in the code, in the technology at the base layer. If we therefore take that away and take away the need to do that and get very good at making sure that not a human, but, and some algorithm, some ML understands that logic, and you take the time, you absolutely need to take the time to teach it. But if you get it to a good enough level, could there be certain complexity that is eliminated by doing this? Which I do acknowledge is leaning back into the first problem we talked about, which is around using tools that we think work and might not. But I want to put it out there. I'm just speaking aloud.
I do think it might be able to give us more objective advice, like on what things we should and shouldn't be using. Maybe not, though. I don't know.
I think it's going to always miss the why context. Like it's going to miss the why context. Like if you tell something what to do or how to do it, that's great, but you still need to know the why. And I think that's where we're getting at with the metadata aspect of metadata gives you more of that context surrounding why we are even here, why we're even doing this thing in the first place, or why does it matter in relation to other things. And I think if we had some future where you can just tell the AI exactly what you want to do, great, it's going to do it. But it's not going to matter unless it knows like what context or why we're doing these things. Like I'm trying to think of a good example, but in terms of like in the physical world of like building a house or something, or doing renovations. If someone looks at you and says like, "Oh, I want you to build me a house strictly out of wood with nothing else," but you're in the middle of like, some place that has no wood, you might question yourself like, why are we doing this? And if they give you a good answer, you might still do it. Or, things of that nature. I just think the why is important in my opinion. Like, and if AI can't
could you not
understand
provide it with
why,
that though?
Can we?
Like, could you not, like your example, like build me a house completely out of wood that is in Siberia.
Yeah.
In a forest fire susceptible area. Like, surely if we've trained it, whatever tool we're putting this into in the right way, it would come back and say, I could do it, but I would recommend you don't. The reason, and this is why. Because I do that. I go in, and maybe I'm outing myself here, and I go like, write me an email to someone who I'm really upset at because they said no to me being able to work on this project I really want to work on. However, they're the head of this department, and this is their general sentiment. So write the email with that in mind, blah, blah, blah. And then it comes back, even now, and says, oh, here's the email. This is why I changed this word to this. Like, already we're seeing some reasoning and some advice. Sense. Like, I would advise that you don't use the word XYZ because, as you've let me know, you want this to be polite, and this is not a polite word. I would recommend you say this instead.
I think to Kris's point earlier, like, some human is still doing you there are the human doing the information organizing, right? You are up front organizing the information in a way where it's helpful to whatever's going to like consume it and retrieve it, right? You're giving the AI all that context up front, and you're saying, hey, do this. So if AI can do that reliably, sure, I think it could be helpful. Are we there today? Probably not. Maybe in the contrived examples that we're using, sure. But when we're talking about like complex systems that relate to one another, I think that's where it's going to fall short, at least today, in today's AI.
Yeah, today.
And mind you, I'm
no.
sorry I didn't have a better example. Like, I don't know. I'm struggling to. I've been up for a long time. Okay, my brain is a little.
I've been convinced. I kind of agree with you on now.
Thank you.
Just like going back to the complexity that we get by using like FAANG related things like they built. A lot of the content is around that, right? So as we train these models, they're going to think that's the right way to do things. So the only way that they'll ever know that that's wrong is if people stop doing it, right?
Yeah,
like it would require like because AIs are a reflection of humans, right? So we have to get it right before the AI can get it right.
Yeah, AI is reflective of its training data, and it will always do the average thing. So I mean, that's the thing I like to say a lot of like, I don't know, yeah, you can use an AI coding assistant if you want the most average code, but I thought we were all here trying to get the best code. But yeah, if you want to go write and have average code, mediocre code, more power to you. But I think what's also interesting, and I think this is like a trick that a trap we've all fallen into around what computers are good at, what humans are good at, right? There's like the two types of problems, right? Or the two types of learning. There's the easy learning and the hard learning. And the easy learning is the stuff that AI systems and computers are really good at because those are the things that are very repetitive. You do it over and over and over and over and over. You can learn from it. So games like chess, or really any game, is a good example of this. You can play it many, many, many different times, and you can learn from each time you play how to get better. And then there are hard problems, which you don't get to do many times, and therefore there's not a lot of data about them. So it's like, if you're spending $300 million building a skyscraper in Manhattan, there's probably not a lot of information about this. So an AI is probably not going to give you good advice about how to build a skyscraper in Manhattan, but it might have great advice about how to build a single family home because we build so many of them. People have written a lot of content about them. So for things that there's a lot of information about, or for things that are those easy learning problems, the AI systems and computers are great at those things. But I think there's a second part of this as well, which is humans are really good at generating things. We're really good at creating and for instance, we're really good at doing that metadata generation. Like we can read something and say, oh, here's some interesting words, and oh, this thing is written in a way where I think this keyword also fits here. Like getting into all of that subtlety. And then computers are really good at checking. They're really good at saying, oh, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Or, oh, hey, maybe you missed this thing, so maybe you should also consider doing that thing, right? So it's good to do human does the work, machine checks the work. Like that's the good workflow. And what AI and a lot of the AI hype tries to get us to do is reverse those two things. And I think when you reverse those two things, now you're having humans try and check the AI. We're terrible at checking things. That's not what we're good at. We are not good at that type of thing. We are not diligent enough. We get bored. We get distracted. And the computers are not very good at generating things because, once again, either going to generate something that's very average or just hallucinate things. And like human creativity kind of sits on that line where it's like if you do a little too much creativity, you wind up hallucinating. So you want to get close to that. But the best type of creativity is the thing that sits like right on that line between like insanity and insane. Yeah, between being insane and sane, right? You got to sit right on that line. And like the AI has no idea how to sit on that line properly. So it'll just barf out stuff at you, kind of like, I mentioned in the other episode how I got the tack command because it's the inverse of cat. And I'm like, that works for some things, but not for this thing. Very creative, but very wrong in this circumstance.
A for effort, AI. A for effort.
A for effort. But I think like
I for idiot. No, I'm just kidding.
But I think this is one of the things about information organization that would help us, because I think there is like a lot of writing about these ideas, and there's a lot of like so many people have thought about this and have written things about this, but you have to go search to find, books and references and talks and videos on this stuff. And our algorithm systems kind of just do what everybody else thinks is good. So it kind of recommends popular things at you. Excuse me. So it's the same problem that we've had with, all of the other things we've been talking about. It's like, yes, you just get recommended stuff that reinforces what you've already learned about, which is saying that like, oh, no, AI can do all these things, or AI in the future will be able to do all of these amazing things. Not that we should. I mean, if we keep trying to make AI do all this stuff, we're going to wind up in much more complexity than we're already in. But it's like, well, let's walk back a little bit. Let's sit down and think like, is this something that we even need to, is this a hard thing to do? Is this a thing worth automating? I think is the big question at the end of the day. And I think when it comes to information organization and generating that metadata and all of this, like no, like it's valuable. Like in your case, Angelica, where you said, oh, we have all this old code, all this historical information. It's super valuable to maybe hire an archivist and have engineers sit down and just read and process through all of that data, because their knowledge will get boosted by that. And then you'll have this really high quality set of information that you could then feed into like a machine learning thing to extract things out eventually, or write some algorithms that help you out with things, instead of just throwing the information at the algorithm to begin with, or throwing at a general algorithm to begin with. So I think like optimizing more for those early stages is a good idea, and having humans do it.
I think this whole conversation about AI reducing complexity is like indicative of why we have so much complexity. It's like, let's do this really complex thing to make this easier.
Yeah.
And it'll just make it more complex. Like,
I mean, I think the AI hype cycle that we're in is the indicative of how complex things have really gotten for us. Because when you actually do the math around AI systems, right? LLMs, they cost what, like $200, $400, $600 million to train one, like exorbitantly expensive to train one of these things. And that's like, hey, how are you ever going to recoup those costs? But it's like, why are we spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build these things, and we don't want to turn around and hire like a librarian for $75K a year to help us organize our information? Like, why is it that we are so willing to go dump that much money into that thing instead of doing the thing that works? Like, why are we so obsessed with the shiny? And I think that's another reason why we have so much complexity, is that we like the shiny. We don't want the thing. We don't want the boring thing that's the simple answer. That's the, oh, just go do it. Like when I say information organization, like, yeah, this is a whole industry. People get PhDs in this. You can go to school to become a librarian or an information scientist or an archivist, and then you can go work, and like we know how to do it. You just go in, you do the work, you catalog the information, and boom, you have all this nice organized information. You can find everything. That's not sexy. That's not shiny.
I think people don't realize how much information is already organized for them and how much value they're getting out of it, to know that they should do it themselves as well, especially companies. Like encyclopedias, phone books, things that traditionally were structured information. I mean, heck, even observability platforms push for structured information. What else is structured information except for organizing the information you have, right? That's the whole point of it. So I think it's go ahead, sorry. No, you said. Oh, okay. No, I think it's like, what else is that, right? It's structured information, it's organizing information, and it brings me into something that I want to talk about complexity is, like, part of why I think complexity is going up and to the right in this industry is that we have sort of mixed and unclear terminology of how we talk about anything in this field. There's 7 different words to describe the same thing. No two parties are using the same vocabulary. Things are not clear, or words are even used that don't mean what it should mean, and we're just very unclear with our terminology in this industry, and I think that leads to a lot of complexity. And to give a quick example of Kubernetes, it's like, if you're a new person learning Kubernetes, you are just thrown into the world of new terminology, right? Pod, stateful set, daemon set, operator, controller, oh, they're the same thing. No, they're not really, but they are the same thing actually under the hood. And it's like, why did we do this to ourselves? We don't need a new word for every little thing. It's okay to just use plain language to describe the thing that we're talking about. But it's like, we have to give it a name. We have to give it a word that's so cool, but it's not descriptive. And it's like, you're just hurting people. Like, that's all you're doing, is hurting people.
That's another thing that seems simple at the start and adds complexity. Like, it seems simpler to call it something, right?
Yeah.
But
I mean, most of the time, people don't want to sit down and, pull up an etymology reference and be like, okay, what is this thing? How do I relate it to words that already exist? How do I break down and understand what words mean? People are like, oh, slap a name on it. We'll figure this out later. Like, we love doing that as an industry. I mean, this is like my whole thing about like asynchronous doesn't mean anything anymore. And like synchronous and asynchronous and concurrent, like these words etymologically do not map correctly onto what we have, and we've just made a giant mess out of just kind of deciding that we're going to throw them around in whatever way, because we're not very precise with our communication. Because, well, quite frankly, most people that learn how to code, or most people that like get CS degrees or whatever, they don't take many English courses, so they don't really learn about, you know, how does etymology work, or how do you go find the meaning of words, or how do you create and invent new words.
And then we're stuck
So I
with
do wanna-
cloud and DevOps.
So I do want to kind of bring this back in. We had a bit of an AI tangent, related enough. But I'm hoping we can kind of formulate a concise hypothesis of where complexity comes from. And does anyone want to take a stab at it? Like if you had to do it in one sentence.
I'll start with one sentence. How everyone thinks about. Oh, sorry. I know I'm on latency. I'm so sorry. I'm on the other side of the United States. My bad. Blame hotel internet. My one description would be, or my one sentence to describe like where complexity comes from. Complexity. Here, I'll restate the problem. Complexity comes from users not describing accurately what it is they're doing with the tools they're working with. That's where complexity comes from. If I have to put one sentence on it.
Anyone else?
I mean, I feel like I said like the root, like I would say that
Yeah, but just one sentence.
complexity comes
Chris,
from
one
a lack
sentence.
of complexity comes from a lack of information organization. Like that, like I feel like over the course of this episode, that has become very reinforced in my mind of like all of the problems that we have talked about could be maybe not solved completely, but definitely mitigated if we had better information organization across the board. Like if we had the ability to communicate in a way that would allow us to, you know, build on previous communication, I think we would be in a much, much better place than we are.
You got one, Angelica?
I'm trying to think. I think I'll give you the beginning of my sentence and the end I'm struggling with. So complexity is caused by the lack of understanding, time, and the need for the new. But I don't think the last part is fully accurate, because I think we've talked both about the root of complexity being a lack of exploration of the different options, but also the exploration of the different options and not being happy with what's already available. So that ending part, I think, is a little bit of a dichotomy, because I think it's actually both. So it's a lack of time, understanding, and both the need for the new and the unwillingness to explore the new.
Gotcha. No, I think that makes sense. I think
It's like
complexity.
a seesaw. That's what I picture when you say this. Yeah.
Yeah. I think complexity comes from attempting to simplify with tools that just move the complexity and add more behind a facade of simplicity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although
And
We've
that's
done
all
it,
she
guys. We've done it. Complexity has
complexity
been
is-
solved.
This is
Kubernetes.
yeah.
complexity is Kubernetes.
That's it.
This
That's
is
the
something
sentence,
I want to explore further, but I think this was a really good like initial exploration. Gives us a lot to think about, and yeah, stay tuned for more about complexity, because it's definitely something I am very interested in exploring further.
Very complex issue.
It really is. I'd love to hear what our listeners think about complexity too.
Yeah,
and
listener,
how-
where do
how
you
they-
think complexity comes from?
Yeah.
Comment down below, please.
Send us a letter by mail.
I don't think
Technically
any
you
of
could,
us
but
should be
please
giving
don't.
any addresses out, please.
I mean, no, like technically there is a PO box you could send a letter to
Oh,
if you
awesome.
want to, but
Right?
I don't know why I said that,
like,
because
no.
somebody's gonna do it. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have not said that at all.
if you, I mean, hey, if you can figure out what that PO box is, I mean, it's not that hard. If you look at enough things on our website and trace enough trails, you will find a PO box. I mean, like,
Follow the
legally, I have to
complexity.
have a PO box, so it's not like a thing that's not supposed. It's public. It's public. You just got to go find it.
Should we wrap things
So wait,
up?
now are you
Does
daring
anyone-
them to do it? Because now I don't know what you're doing.
Now I want a letter. I want a letter now. Should we wrap things up and do unpopular opinions?
Unpopular opinions. Yes, that was yes.
You can't say that without the old jingle going through my head. Like
100%.
etched into my brains.
Yeah, I
All
mean,
right, who has one?
I have one. I wrote one down.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, cool. My unpopular opinion is that LinkedIn has the best like experience out of all social media platforms ever. Bar none. Don't even want rebuttals. None of that.
But
What do you mean?
why?
In fact, the like button?
Yes. The best use of the like button, the best meaning of the like button. In fact, it's the only platform who I even interact with the like button. There's no, I don't even like things on X or Blue Sky or anything. You can go check my profile. But LinkedIn, I use the like button.
Why?
But why? Okay, yeah. Why is it's semantic. It's meaningful. It can be a like. It can be a celebrate. It can be a support or a love. It means multiple things rather than just like. Because like when you use like on other social media platforms, what do you mean? Do you like what I said? Do you agree with it? Do you just like that post as a bookmark for later? Are you just trying to have engagement? It means nothing. So LinkedIn has the best experience for that.
Yeah, I do remember back when Twitter had public likes. Like, I would like something and be like, I don't agree with that, but it was like witty and funny. Is this saying I agree with it? Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not overtly outraged by that statement, but nor do I feel like I fully agree. I kind of need to sit with it for a bit. Because my honest answer is, not to discredit your unpopular opinion, but like, when I like a picture on Facebook or Meta, I think that means I liked it.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Like,
But, when
I
it's a
think
post-
maybe I haven't thought, thought about the different connotations of my like. I feel like maybe I just need to think more deeply, because when I like on any of these platforms, it means I'm like, yes, I liked it.
Listen,
Maybe
like
I
is
need
a
to
very
now. I now need
complex
to look into
topic.
the etymology of the word like.
Yeah, it's
The one thing, this is not my unpopular opinion, the one thing I don't like, and I'd be intrigued now to hear what you think, Matt, is I don't like that LinkedIn gives you these like pre-baked auto replies, because I can tell if I get, well done, Angelica, 1 exclamation mark. You didn't write that. You lazy. You just press the freaking button to auto reply. Like,
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that. Those auto replies
that
are
frustrates
garbage.
me. You get it
Yeah,
on,
those suck.
on like Facebook too, where you just get the happy birthday, 1 exclamation mark, like, what is it, the little party popper emoji. I'm like, you didn't write that. You
Yeah,
just saw,
I
you
agree.
got a notification, you had no idea it's my birthday. You might not even know who I am, but you're like, let me just
See,
do
but
that.
if you posted that you got a new job or something or some sort of thing, I would use the celebrate version of the like, and I
Yeah.
would celebrate your success
I
because
appreciate
it's
that.
meaningful.
That being said, I posted on LinkedIn, I actually removed it because there were so many weird comments on it, but I posted on one of my friends launched a new podcast. It's completely unrelated to this, so it's not cross-pollination, I promise. It's a completely unrelated topic. And I will not even mention what the podcast is. But anyway, I posted about the first episode, and I got, congratulations on your new job. Congratulations on the new opportunity. I was like, no. Did you even read the post? So now you see why I removed it, because I was like, clearly,
oh god.
no, you didn't read this.
That
Anyway.
sums up social media so well in general.
Yeah.
I mean, just show I looked at it without actually reading it, or understanding what it says, or looks like, or the connotations of my like. As you said, Ian, like, did I just inadvertently agree with this without knowing?
All right, I have an unpopular opinion.
Okay.
I think read receipts on texts and emails are the devil. There's the worst thing that we've ever invented. I don't want
Because you
anyone to
like
know.
ignoring people for long periods of time.
Don't you have read receipts on for your texts?
No, I
Oh.
immediately turn those off. I
Okay.
just don't want to know. Like, I also don't want to see that someone has read my thing. Like, if they haven't replied, I want to be like, all right, like they haven't seen it yet, or they're busy, whatever. I don't want to like stew in that, like, oh, they saw it and never replied. Like, I just don't think it's helpful.
That's like presence notifications on different social media sites. It's like, I don't want to know you're online. That means
No.
you might not have read my thing. Like, no.
But to your point, Angelica, I am also habitually bad at replying to people. So
That's
this might be a biased opinion.
Do you think the world would be better if you never knew if someone received your message?
You
Or
don't
is
get
it
it for
better
letters,
in
and
the
we use those for
knowledge?
forever. Like,
I mean, they're
No, but
certified
if I
now.
send someone a message, like a letter, and I perpetually wonder whether they received my letter, I might just start sending a letter every day and then they'll have like 50 letters. And I
That's
didn't know
fine.
they actually just were a really slow writer.
I'm just laughing at Chris's. They're certified mail. Like,
Oh, yeah.
snuck right
Of course
in
you
there.
know
I'm just
that,
laughing
Chris.
at that. Yeah.
I think that's
Actually-
a very good unpopular opinion, because I think it'll divide the crowd on that one.
Yeah.
Because I love knowing when people have read my messages, but I also hate it depending on the message.
I would
No
like
one
for
likes being left
unread to
unread.
make it unread though. Like if I select unread, I want it to like move the read receipt back to unread.
Oh, but I've
'Cause
seen
I use
someone
that.
do that in live though, where I've seen them read it and then I see them sneakily change it back to unread, and I'm like, I saw that.
Because I
Can't
do that.
dupe
I do that
me.
to manage my notifications and stuff. I leave things unread correctly
Oh,
so I can
I do
like, work
that.
through them.
I 100% do that.
I have
I've
so
also
many
on
unreads.
Slack, you'll message someone that's offline, and then you'll see them pop online for like 10 seconds, and then go back offline and not reply. I don't know.
I just assume all communications asynchronous. Like, I know I'm bad at replying to texts. Not as bad as Ian, but I'm bad at replying at texts.
I didn't even know you were bad at replying to texts. Like,
Exactly.
Fair enough. I do think the stewing is real though, Ian. If
Yeah.
I see someone's read my text like 2 days ago and hasn't replied, I then have to reread the text to be like, did I say something wrong? I was just saying, how are
did I
you?
insult them? Like, what?
Have a great day. 1 exclamation point. Should I put an emoji? Do they think I just, you used a LinkedIn feature to just copy and paste anything?
we need semantic reads. It's not read. It's I saw the notification. I have not read yet. I have.
I used to like send a voice message in that case sometimes, just like something wacky that I would say. But now they have transcripts for that, so they know what you're saying.
I feel like we should just like lean into the passive aggressiveness, and like one of the replies you should be able to do in like RCS or iMessage is just like read. Like you should be able to just like mark a message as read, so that if you want to leave someone unread, you can just do it intentionally. Like be
I'd be
passive
fine with
aggressive
that.
aggressively, like not accidentally.
That's fair.
Because sometimes
That's
like
not passive aggressive anymore. It's just aggressive.
it's still passive aggressive.
I guess aggressively passive.
Aggressive
Someone
would be
texted
like
me just saying read.
It would be like replying to me like, I have read your message, period, sent. That's aggressive.
Like the auto replies that you can put
Or
in
the
place.
auto-
Some people's auto replies are savage. I'm on holiday. Like, full stop. No, like if you need questions answers, just like I'm on holiday. Full stop. How
Also-
dare you even have had the audacity of interrupting my vacation?
Also, sometimes you just want to like quickly read something to make sure it's like, oh, is this an emergency? Like something, okay, no, it's not. I can reply to this later. But like sometimes things will be like, oh, now you've read it. And I'm like, but that's... And I was just peeking to make sure it's not like, someone's dying or something. Like,
Very good point. Because like if you get lucky enough to see them in notifications, then you can peek at them without being marking them
Yeah.
read. But if like many messages have gone by and you have to actually click into it, then you're like, damn it, I made it red, but I don't. Yeah, I get you.
No.
I get
I
you.
just write, I'll reply to this later, upside down smiley face. That's
But
what
then
I
you're
do.
never gonna reply to it later.
Yeah, but then I turn it to unread.
Okay.
After that.
All right, so
It's a lot of work.
I know, but it's worth it to make people think that I'm not being passive aggressive to them.
Fair enough. Maybe I should adopt that policy.
This is a great unpopular opinion, Ian. It spurred a lot of conversation. In fact, both of them.
Lots of
Fruitful
conversation.
conversations had.
I did, in fact, read Ian during this too, so we get to use both versions of read. So it's good. I have
any others? Oh, go for it. Chris.
I have an unpopular.
Of course, Chris. That's an
Of course you do, Chris.
Of course I do. So I think it's like a twofer. So the first part is I think the app protocol is like hands down way better than ActivityPub, and I want ActivityPub to just go away. Like I think we should all just like app protocol, well designed, fixes a lot of the weird problems with ActivityPub. Like we should be moving all of our social networks onto it. Like I want an ActivityPub version of like TikTok. I want an ActivityPub version of like of LinkedIn, of like all of these. I want ActivityPub, or not ActivityPub. I want app protocol versions of all of these things, right? ActivityPub. No, I keep saying it. Wow. Geez. I want app proto versions of like LinkedIn and Instagram and TikTok and all of those. Like I want all of that. But I also think that, and this is probably the unpopular part, we should split all these social media apps into like 3 different areas. I think there should be like a client, there should be like an algorithm, and there should be like the storage or the like delivery system. And I think those 3 things should be owned by 3 different entities and be interoperable with each other. Like I don't like that, like, you know, the whole TikTok drama we've been going through. It's like you kind of just want the algorithm, and you want to be able to apply the algorithm to like whatever content is out there. I want to be able to buy the algorithm or something like that. And I also want to be able to like take the algorithm and use a different app, right? Like I want to have configurability, and I think all of our social networks should be designed so that that is possible.
Yeah, I want an algorithm for Facebook that is only people I'm friends with and in a timeline and nothing else. And if they share an advertisement, also isn't there.
I want old Facebook, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to be able to see what old people in my life are doing.
Or I guess it is mostly old people on Facebook now. Yeah, but that's my unpopular opinion. I think app proto is the one we should be going with, and we should also be splitting algorithms from clients from storage.
I think it was smart of them to release the protocol before anything else. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point of what they were doing. So
yeah, but
I haven't done enough research on the app proto to know like why it would be better to like have everything kind of follow it.
I mean, I guess there's 2 big things, right? One, you could actually migrate your account without the participation of the server, right? So in ActivityPub, if like the person that's hosting the server just deletes it, your stuff's gone, right? You're just done, finished. With app proto, even the server gets deleted, like the clients store all of the stuff, so you can just migrate somewhere else. So you can migrate without the participation of the server. So that's a big thing. And then 2, because of the way relays work, you can host your own server without it getting bombarded if you get like a viral post or something like that, right? So it's like servers don't connect directly to other servers. They kind of go through relays, which are, you know, you could see like in the future maybe Cloudflare or Fastly setting up like a app proto relay so that, you know, you can just pass through that. And that makes it a whole lot easier for you to actually just run your own infrastructure instead of having to like rely on some other hosting provider or some other server. Those are the 2 big reasons why I like app proto.
I like it.
I'm still split on if social media should exist at all, but you know.
There's an unpopular opinion.
Yeah.
No more social media. I mean, hey, we almost TikTok almost, you know, disappeared for America. So, and people were upset. So I don't know if that's.
How else would you connect with other people that you're not in geographical?
I mean, how else are you gonna find your news?
Don't.
Twitter died. Like,
Just don't.
just don't.
You're
If
only
you
allowed to
don't
have
live
friends
near
that
me,
live.
you're not my friend.
I mean, I'm kind of okay with not always connecting with people across the world all the time. Because, like, sometimes we focus on, like, we make the world's problems our problems very quickly when there's community problems we should be focused on first. So, like, I'm not fully opposed to it. But I do have a lot of people that I know that are not geographically situated near me. And I would
I'm just
to
like
talk to
not going to talk to my family then, Matt. Cool.
No, I didn't say
No
it
family
for
for
you.
you.
I was speaking just for
No
me.
family for me.
I'm not saying you can't have a phone anymore. Like, you can still call
Teasing.
people.
Certified
My
mail.
grandma
Okay, no,
knows how
just
to use
kidding.
a phone.
Certified mail only.
Sort of. I
My
mean, like,
grandma
I don't know.
only
I mean,
knows how to
okay.
post weird memes on Facebook. She does not know how to answer a phone.
Yeah, I guess like, yeah, you can text people, but I'm not gonna just like randomly send photos to like everybody in my contacts. But I'll like post photos on Instagram or post a story on Instagram.
Oh, I love when
teasing.
people
I do
just send me
think, yeah.
photos.
Should I just start
Like, they
sending
went
you
on a-
photos?
Yeah, you go and see something cool, send it my way. I love when people do that.
I do think it's a good way to like reconnect though. Like I will see some like weird or funny or interesting post from a friend I haven't talked to in like 10 years. And that gives me an in. Where I can be like, oh, that's really cool. Where were you? Or, oh, congrats, you got married. Whereas I wouldn't just like,
And you
well,
didn't
maybe I'm sure
invite
people
me.
would, but I wouldn't message, no. But I wouldn't like message someone. To be honest, I might have forgotten the existence of this person were it not for this strange holiday pic that I saw. So I think it's a nice way to remind you of like the people in your life and take you out of your little bubble.
I will say that like maybe this is an unpopular opinion as well, that like I vastly prefer to give like social media out to people that you like meet randomly. Like if you meet people at bars, like, oh, you meet someone, I'd rather like give out my Instagram than my phone number. Because Instagram, then like
That's
as you were
fair.
saying, like,
That's completely fair.
maybe they have a story or a post. They'll be like, oh, hey, you can like start up a conversation with them. But like text message, you just gotta like blindly text people, and that's always awkward. So I'm just like, and then I given more people my phone number. I don't want to do that. Like, yeah, vastly prefer like, Instagram or whatever. So we can just, chat if we want to chat, or we can just like passively just watch each other's stories and never talk to each other. And that's, fine. A little weird.
I think
that's
we've
the thing.
become way too scared of awkwardness, but another unpopular opinion. Anyways, should we wrap this thing up? Angelica, do you have an unpopular opinion?
I feel like we've had a plethora of unpopular opinions and we've discussed them at length, so I don't think we need to have... And, mine would be brilliant, so it would take another half hour. So I think we can cut it off here.
Yes. Oh, God, this is already so long.
I'm sorry, Kris.
Oh, it's fine.
luck.
I'm just used to editing. It's one of those things where you get in the editing session and it's just like, oh, I'm an hour in, and you're like, I still have 40 minutes to go. It's okay though. It's okay. I'll make it. I'll make it through. I will persevere.
Any
viewers what they
closing
want.
remarks?
Yeah, one big announcement that'll be announced when this podcast ships, or this episode ships, is that Fallthrough has joined the Changelog podcast universe. So we are over on there. I don't know if the super feeds, when like the super feed's going to be up or anything like that, but yeah, we are on Changelog. We're part of the Changelog podcast universe, and you should
And
listen.
what does that mean?
I don't know how to describe it.
Not for
yet.
me, for our listeners, of course.
No, I know for our listeners, I don't know how to describe it yet. I guess it's like, what Changelog was, where they had like Go Time and all of that. So they're basically rebuilding that just with shows that they don't produce themselves. So high quality developer pods and, all of the nice like chat channels. So we'll be in there. Zulip, on Slack for as long as I still have that, all of that cool stuff. And if you want to hear more about this, you should tune into the Changelog and Friends episode that shipped on Friday, where Matt and I will be talking with Jared and Adam about this wonderful announcement.
What date is Friday? Just in case I'm listening to this in 5 months.
January 24th?
4th, 2025.
Is that it? That sounds right. No. Yes, because today's... Yes. Or it'll be... Like, what's the current... Hold on.
The 20th today.
It'll be out there somewhere.
This
It'll
Friday.
be Changelog and Friends episode number 77.
Perfect. CPU.fm is the URL for those curious.
Well, thank
All
you
right.
for having me.
All right,
Yeah,
yeah, take us
thanks.
home, Ian.
Yeah, come
Thank
on.
you all
take us home.
for chatting. I don't have any taking home line. Thanks for listening. Comment if you have ideas about complexity. We would love to hear them. And see you next time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we should say we're trying to do a mini series on complexity. So definitely send us all your thoughts. And if there's anybody that we should talk to, that you're like, oh, I really want to hear this person's opinion on complexity, send it our way. Send it to us on Blue Sky or in the Changelog Zulip or I don't think we have email set up, so not by email, but just find a way to reach out to us, and or you could leave a comment, or if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment. That's what you should do. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would greatly appreciate it, and like turn on the little notification bell while you're at it. And yeah, I think that's all the thing. Yeah, like, comment, share, subscribe. Those are the things you're supposed to say. Yes.
Send a letter.
Send a letter via certified mail. If you can find the PO box. Now that I've said that twice, people are actually going to spend a lot of time.
Should we offer a reward for the first letter we get to our PO box?
What kind of reward?
I will.
Wait, what's first mean? First by certified mail time?
I guess first by when I pick it up.
What if I find it
Postmark
today,
date.
create it, and then physically walk it to your door, Kris?
It's a PO
Here
box,
you go.
not a door.
I've certified the mail via me.
I would love to get some letters. That PO box has been sitting empty for a while. Send me some stuff. Nice letters. Send nice letters. And no weird stuff.
No, actually, I'm not going to continue that.
Angelica,
On that note,
you're going to make us
see
have
you
to mark
guys
this explicit.
This is why I'm not a host anymore.
Goodbye, everyone.
goodbye. See you next time.
Oh, I found it that fast.